I tried to avoid her, but when my friend's older sister smiled and said, "Come here," everything I thought I knew about myself changed. The first time I saw her properly, I knew I should have looked away. I had promised myself I'd avoid her, my friend's older sister, as much as possible. She had a reputation for being magnetic, not in a flashy or overwhelming way, but in that quiet, effortless way that made people notice without realizing it. Yet, there I was, standing in the living room, my gaze locking on her before I could stop it. She was leaning against the doorway, casually flipping through a magazine, her posture relaxed but somehow commanding the space. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made the room feel warmer. She noticed me immediately. I could tell by the subtle lift of her eyebrows, the small, knowing curve of her lips, and then she smiled. Not the polite, passing smile you give someone you barely know. This was deliberate, gentle, and somehow teasing. It made my chest tighten in a way that felt both thrilling and uncomfortable. I could feel a nervous warmth spreading across my face, my palms suddenly clammy. I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't noticed her at all, but my body betrayed me. I was rooted to the spot, as if some invisible force held me there. She didn't move toward me immediately. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her eyes sparkling, a soft laugh escaping her lips, light and unassuming, yet it lingered in the air like music. The smell of her perfume, faint and floral, reached me in the quiet room. It was subtle, but it wrapped around my senses in a way that made everything else fade. The ticking clock, the muted hum of the refrigerator, the muffled voices outside the room. For a moment it was just her and me. Then she spoke casually, almost as if she had noticed nothing unusual. "Come here." The words were simple, but the effect was anything but. My heart leapt, and I felt a flutter of hesitation. Every rational thought told me to step back. She was my friend's sister, and I was supposed to avoid this. But the warmth in her voice, the easy confidence in the way she said it, made me take a tentative step forward. My stomach knotted with both excitement and guilt. As I approached, she shifted slightly, her hand brushing the edge of the table, close enough that my fingers almost touched hers. That fleeting contact, accidental or intentional, sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. I found myself acutely aware of how close we were, the soft sway of her shoulders, the delicate movement of her hands, the subtle tilt of her head when she looked at me. Every detail seemed amplified. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just a crush that would fade with a few awkward encounters. There was something different here, something electric, quiet, and undeniably magnetic. And as she smiled again, that gentle, knowing smile, I understood that my attempts to avoid her might be useless. This was the beginning. I should have stayed in my corner, kept my distance, and reminded myself that this was my friend's older sister, not someone I was supposed to notice, let alone feel drawn to. But she had a way of pulling you in without even trying. That afternoon it happened again. She was in the kitchen, leaning casually against the counter, flipping through a small recipe notebook. The sunlight spilled in through the window, illuminating the golden highlights in her hair and casting a soft glow over her face. I hesitated at the threshold, pretending to tie my shoe, hoping she wouldn't notice me lingering. But, of course, she did. "Hey!" she called, her voice soft but carrying a teasing lilt. "Come help me with this. I promise it won't take long." It was such a simple, ordinary thing, helping someone measure ingredients, moving a bowl from one counter to another. Yet the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I wanted to resist, to claim some personal boundary, but her gaze was impossible to deny. There was warmth there, a subtle invitation that made me step closer, slow and deliberate, like I was testing myself as much as testing her. As I approached, I noticed small details I'd somehow missed before. The faint scent of vanilla from her lotion, the gentle tilt of her head when she smiled, the way her hands moved with ease and confidence. Everything about her seemed effortless, but to me it was intoxicating. She handed me a wooden spoon, her fingers brushing mine ever so slightly. It was almost accidental, just a passing touch, but it made my pulse jump. My hand lingered just a moment too long near hers as I took the spoon, and I could feel a subtle tension in the air. We both knew it, though neither of us spoke it. "Careful," she said with a playful smile, as I nearly spilled a bit of flour. Her voice was teasing, light, but it had an undertone that made me aware of how close we were. The kitchen, normally mundane, felt suddenly intimate. The sunlight, the warmth, the quiet clatter of utensils, and the soft hum of her laughter wrapping around me like a gentle tide. At one point, she leaned slightly toward me to reach for something on the counter. Her shoulder brushed mine. I froze for a fraction of a second, aware of the spark in that contact. She didn't pull away. In fact, she smiled knowingly, as if she had planned it all along. My heart raced, and I became hyper-aware of her presence. The softness in her movements, the subtle sway of her hips, the warmth that seemed to radiate from her just by existing nearby. We worked in silence for a few moments after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was a rhythm between us now, a quiet understanding that words weren't always necessary. Every glance, every small movement, seemed charged with an unspoken tension. By the time the cookies were in the oven, I realized that my attempts to keep my distance were futile. She had found a way to draw me in, to make the ordinary feel electric. And deep down, I knew that every playful smile, every subtle touch, would make the next encounter even harder to resist. After that afternoon in the kitchen, I couldn't stop noticing her. It was like a subtle undercurrent had been set in motion, one I wasn't sure I wanted to resist. Every time I saw her, even from across the room, my chest tightened, my palms felt warmer, and my thoughts scattered in ways I didn't expect. I tried to act normal, to blend into the background, but somehow, she had become the center of my attention. She didn't have to do anything overt. Sometimes it was just the way she laughed, low, effortless, spilling into the space around her. Or the way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, tilting her head just slightly, giving the world and me a glimpse of something soft, something real beneath her confident exterior. Each small gesture made me acutely aware of her presence, a magnetic pull I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just her physicality, although that drew me in undeniably. It was the way she moved through a space, the quiet confidence in her posture, the ease with which she could make a simple room feel alive. My eyes would catch hers by accident, or maybe not by accident at all, and we'd freeze in a brief, loaded moment. A glance that lasted too long. A subtle arch of her eyebrow. A small, knowing smile. Each encounter left my thoughts spinning long after she walked away. I tried to rationalize it. She was older, my friend's sister. This attraction was forbidden, unspoken, and likely foolish. And yet, there was something in the way she looked at me. A flicker of recognition, perhaps even amusement at my obvious discomfort, that made me question my own intentions. Was she teasing me, testing me, or was this just her nature, kind and playful, that happened to unsettle me so profoundly? It was during one of those quiet afternoons, sitting in the living room while she read a book, that our hands brushed. I reached for the same page she was turning, and for a fleeting moment, our fingers touched. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a shiver through me that lingered far longer than it should have. I pulled back slightly, conscious of the charge in the air, but she didn't recoil. Instead, she looked up from her book, caught my gaze and smiled. A soft, teasing smile that made my stomach twist in ways I couldn't name. The more I tried to ignore her, the more I found myself noticing every subtle detail. The curve of her smile, the way her shoulders relaxed when she laughed, the faint perfume that seemed to linger in the air after she moved past. Even ordinary moments, like her leaning over a table to grab a glass of water, felt significant. My mind rewound them repeatedly, imagining what it would feel like to be closer, to hear her voice just a little more, to feel the warmth of her hand on mine again. By the end of that week, I realized I was no longer just drawn to her physically. There was a curiosity, a fascination, a desire to understand her. Not in a fleeting, shallow way, but in a quiet, insistent manner that made me both excited and apprehensive. Every glance, every accidental touch, Every fleeting smile had become its own story, and I was utterly lost in the tension between my restraint and the pull I could no longer deny. And deep down, I knew that ignoring her any longer wasn't just impossible. It was meaningless. She had found a way to make the world feel smaller, more intimate, and entirely centered on the unspoken connection building quietly between us. That evening, I found myself in the quiet corner of the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone while stealing glances at her. She had a way of appearing at just the right moment, casually leaning against the doorway, her presence filling the space without making a sound. I could feel the tension between us, unspoken but undeniable, and for the first time I sensed that maybe she noticed it too. "Hey!" she said softly, approaching with that calm, confident grace that made my pulse accelerate. "Why do you keep avoiding me?" I nearly choked on my own hesitation. Avoiding her. That was the last thing I wanted to do, yet here I was, caught between instinct and self-restraint. She smiled, not mockingly, but with an ease that made it impossible to feel embarrassed. Her eyes, warm and perceptive, held mine for a fraction too long. It was as if she was giving me permission to be honest without forcing me to speak. I don't know," I muttered, my voice low. I don't want to make things awkward. You're my friend's sister, and—" she chuckled, cutting me off gently. "You're worried I'll bite." Her tone was teasing, but soft, like a feather brushing against fragile nerves. "Relax. I'm not going to make things weird for you." I laughed nervously, the sound hollow in the quiet room. And yet, her presence made the silence between us feel less like tension and more like possibility. Sitting across from her, I noticed everything about her. The subtle curve of her lips, the way her eyes seemed to catch the light in a new way, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders as she leaned slightly forward. There was something disarmingly human about her, and in that moment I wanted to understand it. All of it. "Tell me," she said, tilting her head, a soft curiosity in her eyes. "What's really going through your mind when I'm around?" Her question caught me off guard. My chest tightened, my throat felt dry, and I realized I didn't want to lie, so I didn't. I notice everything about you," I admitted quietly, almost afraid to hear my own words. "The way you laugh, the way you move, even the small things, like how you tilt your head when you're thinking. I try to look away, but I can't." She didn't flinch. Instead, a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "That's flattering, actually," she said softly, her hand brushing against the armrest near mine. Just that tiny, casual gesture sent an unexpected warmth up my arm. I felt my body respond before my mind could catch up. We lingered in that space for a while, talking quietly, sharing small anecdotes, gentle teasing, and meaningful silences. It wasn't a grand confession or a declaration of love. Not yet, but it was intimate in a way that felt rare and significant. Every glance, every small smile, every brush of hands seemed amplified, charged with a subtle electricity neither of us fully acknowledged out loud. By the time the conversation ended, I knew something had shifted. The tension between us was no longer just curiosity or fleeting attraction. It had deepened into understanding, into a quiet, mutual awareness. And in that awareness, I realized I could no longer pretend she was just my friend's sister. She was more than I expected, more than I wanted to admit, more than I could ignore. After that conversation, everything changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that the world could see, but in the quiet spaces between us, where words weren't necessary. I began to notice her in ways I hadn't before. Not just her movements or smiles, but the rhythm of her presence. It was subtle, like a pulse I couldn't ignore, a quiet energy that made every shared moment feel heavier with meaning. We started spending more time together, though always under the casual pretext of normal interactions. Helping her carry groceries from the car, sharing a bench in the park while she explained a book she loved, laughing over a joke my friend had made earlier. Each ordinary activity carried a weight I could feel in my chest. The simple act of being near her became a small, intoxicating thrill. It wasn't just proximity. It was awareness. I noticed how she unconsciously leaned slightly toward me when she spoke, as if the world naturally compressed around our shared space. The scent of her shampoo lingered faintly in the air whenever she passed by. Even the small brush of her hand against mine while we reached for the same object sent a rush through me, making me hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. She noticed it too. I could tell by the subtle glances she cast when she thought I wasn't looking, the gentle teasing in her tone, and the way her laughter seemed directed just at me, even when the room was full of other people. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between us now, a silent understanding that our connection was more than casual, even if neither of us was ready to name it. One afternoon, she invited me over under the guise of helping her with some minor task around the house. The moment I stepped inside, the air seemed warmer, the light softer. She was perched on the edge of the sofa, casually flipping through a magazine, and when she saw me, her lips curved into that familiar, knowing smile. "You made it," she said simply, but the way she said it made my chest tighten. As we moved around the room, completing small tasks together, I became acutely aware of how natural it felt to be near her. Every casual touch, every laugh shared over a minor mishap, every brush of shoulders as we passed each other, each felt loaded with unspoken meaning. I could feel the tension in my body, the pull toward her, but also the mutual recognition that we were treading a delicate line. For the first time, I realized our connection wasn't fleeting. It wasn't just curiosity or a crush. It was awareness, mutual and undeniable. And in that awareness, a slow, steady rhythm began to form between us. Small, meaningful touches, lingering glances, subtle smiles, and the quiet, steady acknowledgement of something neither of us wanted to rush. By the end of that day, I understood it fully. She had a way of entering your space, quietly, gently, and without a word, making the ordinary feel extraordinary. And I, against all reason, couldn't stop noticing, couldn't stop feeling, and couldn't stop wanting to be near her, even if it terrified me. Every glance, every touch, every shared moment was a small step closer to something neither of us had named, yet both of us felt in our bones. The tension between us had been building slowly, almost imperceptibly, but that afternoon it became impossible to ignore. We were alone, the house quiet except for the soft hum of a ceiling fan and the faint sound of distant traffic outside. She was sitting near the window, sunlight spilling across her shoulders, casting a soft golden glow over her hair. I had thought I knew her, but moments like this reminded me how little I actually did. She glanced up at me with that familiar, knowing smile, and I felt my chest tighten. My palms were warmer than usual, and every nerve in my body seemed to hum in anticipation. We moved through the room in silence, passing books, straightening cushions, carrying trivial things that suddenly felt monumental. Each brush of her hand against mine, brief, casual, almost accidental, sent a jolt of electricity through me. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was a pull, quiet but irresistible, that left me acutely aware of every inch of space between us. She noticed the shift in my demeanor, I could tell. There was a subtle softness in her gaze, a gentle awareness in the tilt of her head as she studied me. "You seem distracted," she said, her voice low, teasing, but layered with something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. I tried to respond casually, but my words felt clumsy, inadequate. "Just thinking," I muttered, unable to hide the way my heart was racing. She smiled, that slow, knowing smile that made me feel both exposed and strangely comforted. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned just a little closer. The scent of her perfume reached me more clearly now, subtle, warm, a hint of something floral. It wrapped around me like a gentle tide, and I realized that my focus had narrowed entirely to her. Every flicker of expression, every tiny gesture, every soft laugh became magnified, as if the rest of the world had faded. Our hands brushed again, this time with slightly more intention. I froze, caught in the unspoken charge of the moment, and she didn't pull away. Her eyes met mine, steady, calm, yet sparkling with something unspoken. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement, a quiet promise of understanding, of shared desire restrained by circumstances, and yet undeniable in its intensity. We lingered in that tension, neither speaking for a long moment. My chest tightened, my breathing caught in my throat, and yet there was no fear, only a strange, delicious anticipation. I wanted to reach for her, to close the small distance between us, but I also wanted to savor this delicate balance, this fragile awareness of connection that had been slowly building over weeks. Finally, she smiled softly, almost imperceptibly, and tilted her head toward the couch. "Sit," she said gently, as if inviting me into her space without words, without pressure. I did, heart hammering, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her, the subtle brush of her arm as she shifted nearby, and the unspoken acknowledgement of what was hanging in the air between us. In that moment, the slow burn became almost unbearable. Every glance, every touch, every quiet smile told a story we weren't ready to name aloud, but both of us felt it deeply. And I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, that nothing could undo what had already begun. The days that followed were quieter, but somehow heavier with meaning. That afternoon, the one where our hands brushed, and the air had felt almost electric, lingered in my mind, replaying in flashes. The warmth of her presence, the subtle tilt of her head, the soft, knowing smile that had spoken volumes without a single word. Every moment we spent together since then carried that same weight, that same quiet acknowledgement of something growing between us. We found ourselves stealing moments more often, under the guise of ordinary things. Sharing a coffee, helping with a small household task, walking down a familiar street. Each interaction felt charged, yet natural, as if we were discovering a rhythm unique to the two of us. I noticed how she would sometimes brush her hand against mine accidentally, or how our glances would linger just a fraction too long. And I realized I didn't want these moments to end. Not because I wanted to cross boundaries, but because simply being near her had become a kind of quiet joy I hadn't anticipated. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in gold and amber hues, she invited me to sit beside her on the sofa. There was no teasing, no playful invitation this time, just calm, quiet presence. I felt the faint warmth of her shoulder near mine, the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the soft evening air. I could hear the rhythm of her breathing, steady and comforting, and I realized that for the first time, I felt entirely at ease in her presence. "I like this," she said softly, almost to herself, glancing at me with a gentle, open smile. "I like being around you like this. No pressure, no expectations." I smiled, my chest tight with emotion, and nodded. "Me too," I whispered, and in that simple exchange, weeks of unspoken feelings, glances, touches, and quiet tension seemed to find a small, perfect release. She leaned back slightly, letting our shoulders brush together casually, and I felt a warmth spread through me that was both comforting and thrilling. There was no rush, no dramatic declaration, just the shared understanding that what had begun as curiosity, hesitation, and tension had grown into something mutual, something meaningful. We didn't need words to define it fully. The lingering glances, the subtle touches, the quiet laughs, and the comfort of shared silences spoke volumes. I realized that the story wasn't about how we began, or even the age gap, or the social boundaries. It was about these moments, small and significant, that built trust, awareness, and connection. As the evening faded, she turned toward me with a soft, knowing look. I smiled back, and our fingers brushed lightly. Deliberate, gentle, meaningful. That single touch held everything we had yet to say. It was promise enough, and in that quiet, golden moment, I knew that whatever happened next, whether the world caught up to us or not, we had found something rare, something steady, safe, and unspoken, something that would stay with both of us, shaping who we were, how we felt, and how we would remember these days forever. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, but it was ours. A slow, beautiful beginning that left the heart full and the mind quietly amazed at how unexpectedly, wonderfully love could grow. If this story made your heart skip a beat, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another slow burn romance. Share your favorite moment in the comments. We'd love to hear which glance or touch left you swooning.